Okay, the mics are live, just as an FYI. I'm going to call to order a public hearing of the Planning and Economic Development Committee on Tuesday, September 18th, 2018 at 7:02 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. And if the clerk would please call the roll.
Alderman at Large David Tenza. Present. Alderman at Large Brendan Laws.
Present.
Alderman Jan Schmidt. I'm here. And Alderwoman Melissa Goya, our chair.
Present, and Alderman Jetty this evening has a conflict and will not be joining us. And also in attendance, we have Alderman McCarthy, Alderwoman Kelly, Alderman Lopez, and Alderman Dowd. So our public hearing this evening is in reference to Ordinance 18019, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding urban chickens. And as provided for in RO 5-28, Director Marchant will come up and give us a brief explanation on the ordinance. Thank you.
Copies of zoning map.
Great,
If
thank you.
anybody is
Yeah, you want to
interested.
just pass them around.
Pass a couple each way.
And I will just, as we're passing these around, just to let people who are here and who are watching know, this was also referred to the planning board, and they postponed it until their October 4th meeting. So we will be discussing the ordinance tonight, but at the end of the evening, I will be asking for a motion to table it until we hear back from the planning board. So there will be another public hearing at the planning board as well as another meeting of PEDC in reference to this ordinance. And yes, Director Marchant is also going to be putting the map up on the screen, so you'll be able to see it.
I do have one extra here if somebody wants it. Okay. There we go. We have significant pause effect. Very dramatic. Yeah, dramatic pause.
There.
Almost there. All right. Thank you very much for having me this evening. Again, Director Sarah Marchant of the Community Development Division, and I'm here to give a very brief overview. I think I have 5 whole slides on this proposed amendments to 01819. So this is one of the #1 phone calls we get in community development each week. Can I have chickens at my house? And today, the answer is if you are in the R30 or R40 zoning district, you may have chickens. And so I have the zoning map here. Okay. I believe I have the zoning map here. Yep. And so I've passed some around. It is harder to see, but R40 and R30 are our largest lot residential, and that means you have a minimum of 40,000 square feet or 30,000 square feet. For your lot. So they're the areas down here in the southwest quadrant on the farthest reaches of the community. They are, the pink and this blue, for those of you at home, and I'm sorry for the pause on the mouse. I'm sure I'm not jerking it around like that. And then in the north of the city, there's some up here. Generally, these areas are with the least access to water and sewer and the largest lot zoning. So those are the only areas they're allowed right now. They're allowed by right. There is no requirement for a coop or spacing or anything like that. They're just allowed by right. Everywhere else you live, the answer is no. You're not allowed to have chickens. And so the proposal here is to allow chickens in all of the other residential zoning districts. So that would have been everywhere else on the map that's zoned residential, which includes R18, R9, RA, RB, and RC. So it wouldn't be along their major corridors. It wouldn't be, say, on DW Highway or on 101A. It wouldn't be directly on our major routes, but it would, not in the commercial industrial areas, but it would be anywhere else where there's residential areas. This would be allowed by the issuance of a land use permit. The cost of a land use permit is $25. We have a bit of education that we've gathered that we would intend to hand out with permits. The UNH Cooperative Extension, I can hand these out, I can give them to you later. UNH Cooperative Extension has a ton of information on raising chickens. I have just 2 of them here: poultry health and management for the small flock, and producing your own eggs. And so they have everything here from, again, how to care and keeping of your chickens, basic concerns about sanitary conditions, and they are an amazing resource. And looking at all the other communities that have adopted things like this, the Cooperative Extension has been a huge resource in general for the individual owner or the municipality. So the purpose of these changes is to allow for the keeping of female chickens only, no roosters, on a lot for the sole use and enjoyment of the residents. So that's not, they would not be for sale. This would not be for the sale of eggs, while preserving the quality of the surrounding neighborhoods and not allowing the chickens to be a nuisance. And so how do we propose to do that? We, as part of this ordinance amendment, there are quite a few standards that have been put in place. So you would be limited to a maximum of 6 chickens. This is for chickens only. It does not allow for geese or guinea hen, who like to roost in trees, or some of the other types of fowl. We've been very specific with the regulations. There is minimum areas defined, both indoor space and outdoor runs are encouraged. Coops could only be in a side or rear setback. This drawing shows you some of the dimensional requirements of the coop. You would have to have a sealed, tight container to store manure in, with a maximum of 3 cubic feet stored at any time. The landfill will take any manure. Let's see, and this is only going to be allowed no matter what type of residence you have in those districts, in single family or duplexes. So if you have a 3-family or a 4-family, this would not permit chickens at this time. Those would not be allowed. We've partnered with the health officer underneath the Division of Public Health and Community Services, the animal control officer under the police department, and the Humane Society for Greater Nashua. As part of the ordinance amendments, you'll see attached there are amendments to certainly the land use code, which is the limiting factor here, but also to the health officers, a section around the health officer, and quite a few regarding the animal control officer. These ordinance updates, amendments would allow for the animal control officer to impound a chicken that was running free or not meeting the standards. Once it was impounded, the Humane Society has already bought a coop and is ready to take any chickens that need housing. The Humane Society is also willing to, as part of this partnership, take on any roosters that accidentally maybe grow from chicks or that are brought in, because you're not allowed to have roosters as part of this. And so they have agreed to be a partner to make sure that we, if anybody can't end up taking their chickens, that they would be a good resource to the community as well. So we were trying to partner with all our different groups to make sure that we were covering all aspects of what does work well and what doesn't work. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or actually this is public hearing, right? So not yet.
Back to the meeting. Okay, thank you. Given that brief explanation, is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor of amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding urban chickens? Yes, please come forward and state your name and address in the mic for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Michael Runka. During my day job, I work with the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter, but I'm a resident of 35 Block Street. And I also grew up kind of south and west of Mount Monadnock, so I've been from this area for, since I was very small. And I have to say, I grew up with chickens. I think that chickens are, pretty harmless, and they, are sometimes can be pets, sometimes can, lay eggs. Not always, if you're familiar with chickens. But I'm actually here because I believe that Nashua is a city that grows, and I think that Nashua is a city that grows economically, but I think Nashua is actually a city that grows in terms of we grow things here, and some of that may be our own food. And I think that the connection between growing food, whether it may be eggs or zucchini or tomatoes, and growing a city is really, I mean, they're linked. Because when things grow here in terms of food, we're more connected to our community, we're more connected to what's happening here. And I think that by passing this amendment, that we actually allow people to have an opportunity to say, wow, I'm not disconnected from the zucchini that I bought at Market Basket. I'm not disconnected from the eggs that I got somewhere else. It's all growing right here. And I think that that helps us have pride as a city. I think it helps us have a connection to the food that we eat. And I think for that reason, and not only that, chickens are cute. And, from my perspective, no harm has ever been done by a couple of chickens. But thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Yes, please come forward and state your name and address.
Fran,
You can tilt that too.
oh,
Yeah, there you
I
go.
was going to be tall. Fran Nutter Upham, 3 Fulton Street. I think the previous speaker said it all, but I just wanted to say I am in favor of amending so that more people in Nashua can have chickens. Okay, thanks.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor? Yeah. Again, your name and address.
Gene Harrington, Nashua Farmers Exchange, 38.5 Bridge Street. We have been dealing with chickens here for better than 40 years. Most of them go outside the city. There are people in the city that do get chickens from us every year, and we sell all the supplies and the food for them. And I am wholeheartedly in favor of the purpose of this ordinance. I did have a few comments about some of the language, some nuances in it. And that basically comes from the fact that I've had chickens for 40 years. So I know a few little things, tweaks to it. And may I give those out now? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Under C, standards, this is on page 2 if you have your copy of it in front of you. I would add the word adult, so it says up to 6 adult chickens.
Under, yes, C2, 6
Yep.
adults.
Many people, when they first get their chickens, they don't know if they've got hens or roosters. They get 6 or a dozen little ones, and they let them grow up, and then, sure, they get rid of the roosters as they get towards adulthood. And we don't worry about the young ones crowing, because they don't crow until they're an adult. So I would suggest amending that to just add the word adult, and if you need to add another language about how many babies you can have at one point in time, that might be something to throw in there. I also like to add that word adult in there because many of the schools here in town still have chickens hatch in class. And where do the baby chickens go after they hatch? Somebody, usually in the city, takes them home. And those chickens, because they've been hatched in school, they're not sexed. So there's going to be a 50-50 sex ratio there. So if you get 6 birds, 6 baby chicks, you're very likely to have to get rid of 3 of them within 6 months. Under 7, the enclosed run, which, right, is on the 3rd page in. I would suggest that the maximum height of the run be something closer to 8 feet, because we're talking the maximum height. And if you want somebody to be able to get in that run and keep it clean, then you need to be able to have at least 6 feet inside at the lowest point. The runs that I've been familiar with, the roof is going to sag some. If you've got a maximum of 6 feet on the sides, In the middle, it's going to be less than 6 feet, and somebody my height would have a problem getting in there on a regular basis to clean it. I did bring a picture of one run that I have seen for sale, and it does show it's 6 feet on the sides, and then it goes up to about 8 feet in the center, so it has a little peaked roof. The last one is one of my little picayunes. I've been involved in my own town with some of the zoning ordinances and writing and correcting the verbiage on a few things. Under 93-3, actually it's 93-3, where the chickens are actually exempted from this part of the ordinance. The way I read it, it says that if you put a doghouse out in your yard, it has to be 45 feet from any building that is occupied by a human. To keep or house any animal in a structure, it has to be 45 feet from any building occupied by a human. And I think maybe you want to exempt other domestic pets. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor? Yes, please.
I don't know about in favor, it's kind of half-half.
Feel free, yeah. And your name and address. If you want to hold it, that's fine.
My
too.
name is Jennifer Chen, and I live at 93 Folly Road in Nashua. I live in 1 acre lot. My neighbor has 2 acres. My neighbor has 2 acres. And we're surrounded by conservation land. We have conservation land by the Merrimack, I think, on the other side. I'm right facing another conservation land. So every year, there's bear sightings on Folly Road. There's always turkeys roaming around and deers. And even last year, we found 2 snakes in our front yard. So this is not the normal, typical Nashua, so I'm not really sure if our house was in R30 or 40. But part of the reason why I really, really like chickens is because when I first moved in, there were so many mosquitoes. And with the chickens patrolling the lot, our mosquito population has gone down a lot, along with a lot of ticks, because there's a lot of Lyme disease going around, and I'm petrified of it. I don't go near the woods. I just let the chickens go in the woods and let them do their job. So that will be a few of the things that that really needs to be put into perspective, because I'm okay with having, restriction with chickens. Sometimes we do need some restriction somewhere. But chickens that is caged inside is not really healthy. I mean, when we have 1 acre lot, and tell them to just be fended off to certain square footage. And I heard him saying something about roof. Chicken coop must have roof because they need to be, but they also need to be very, very well ventilated. The only time chickens should really be inside the chicken coop is when they're sleeping and when they're laying eggs. If they're staying inside the coop any other time, they're sick. They are not normal chickens. So when we talk about the run, we cannot have something with the height restriction, because most of the chicken run with a lot of healthy chickens will not have ceiling. The only issue will be the hawk, but that's another issue. So that's all I have to say. But my main point is Lyme disease. If I was to have 6 chickens, I'll be lucky to have about 3 eggs a day, and my son alone eats 3 eggs, and my husband and I'll be starving. So I guess, I'm against restricting to certain number of chickens, because every house lot is different.
Okay,
Thank you.
Please. And again, your name and address.
My name's Sandy Menard. I live at 30 Elgin Street. I agree that we should be allowed to have chickens, but like my previous person, don't like a lot of the restrictions that are trying to be implemented, especially the minimum of 6. My question is, what do we do if we have more than 6? Um, are we going to be forced to sell them, get rid of them? People think chickens are part of their family, they're like their pet. So that's one of my concerns. The other, another concern is the amount of chickens, because if you have a large family, 6 chickens is, like she said, is only 3. And if you have like 8 people in your family, you'll need more than 3 a day. And it's a great healthy food. I did some research, and according to the CDC, 1.2 million illnesses per year from salmonella, with about 450 deaths per year. That that's from salmonella, and according to the CDC, they actually provide you how to have healthy flocks, how to take care of them. They have this where it says 70 outbreaks of salmonella in the backyard poultry, but that was over a course of 17 years. There was 70 salmonella outbreaks in 17 years, so the risk is so minimal. So I have a concern about the selling of the eggs. I don't see why not. It doesn't make any sense. I also have a concern about them roaming around in the backyard. I don't, like she said about the tick population, you know, if we have a fence, why can't they roam around in our own backyard? And that's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Please. And again, if you would just state your name and address.
Lisa Romero, 11 Lincoln Ave. So my husband and I, he came here on a whim because we heard recently that you were meeting tonight, so we don't have all the details, but we would like to explain that we did have chickens in our somewhat city-like area, and we live in a quarter-acre lot, and we had about 6 chickens, which was a wonderful number of chickens to have. And we thought we were within the zoning area, and then we found out we weren't. So we had them for about 3.5 years, and we had to get rid of them. They were wonderful community pets. They roamed around everywhere. Everybody loved them. It brought the community together, I have to say. We did share the eggs. Nobody had ever gotten sick in the 3 years that we had them. And they did do a lot of cleanup of bugs. I can't even tell you, they cleaned up nicely. We have more mosquitoes now than we ever did, unfortunately. And as far as them roaming around the yard and creating a mess, they just don't. It's not like, I think that if you keep up after them, they will not be, you won't have a mess. It won't be turned into a junkyard or an old smelly farm. I think that people may be afraid of something like that. That's not what happens. You know, the naturalness, the natural environment kind of takes care of itself. And if it's on any pavement, whatever, you clean it up. Just like taking care of any other pet that you have, a dog or even a cat or whatever is out there that may be defecating in the yard somewhere, you pick it up. You don't leave it there. And if it does get out of control, then somebody comes in and tells you to pick it up. But they were wonderful little creatures, wonderful pets, and they're very social. Yeah, and the people just to say. So when you do allow them to become social and part of your life, these little chickens actually have gone off to a new coop with several other chickens and have become and had made them or taught them to be very social. So they're social not only with themselves but with the other pets in the area and with the other and with the people who live in that home. So just a little.
Thank you.
Chickens.
Thank you.
Thanks. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Okay. And I'll now take testimony against or in opposition. Seeing none. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor? Okay, seeing none. And anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Okay, seeing none. I will declare the public hearing closed at
7:27.
7:27. Thank you. So just for those of you who may not be familiar with the process, we're now going to go into a regular Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting. We have a couple of other things on our agenda before we get to this, but at the beginning of the meeting, there will be an opportunity for public comment if you wish to make any other comments that you think of while you're sitting here. And then after hearing our discussion, there will be another opportunity for public comment at the end of this meeting. And as I stated prior to the public hearing, we will be tabling this because it's also going before the planning board on October 4th. There will be a public hearing there. You'll have an opportunity to speak if you would like, and then it will come back to this committee. So whatever happens here tonight is not the end. There will be several other opportunities to speak to this issue, to this ordinance. Okay. So I will call the meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee to order at 7:28. And if the clerk will please call the roll.
Certainly. Alderman at Large David Tenza. Alderman at Large Brandon Laws. Alderman Jan Schmidt, I'm here. And Chair Marianne Melissa Golia.
Present, and as I indicated at the public hearing, Alderman Jettie had a conflict this evening and is not able to attend. And also in attendance, Alderman McCarthy, Alderwoman Kelly, Alderman Lopez, and Alderman Dowd. So we have a quorum, and we also have Director Marchant and Julie Chisholm. I don't have the name in front of me. I'm sorry, Julie. The first item on our agenda is public comments. So if anyone would like to provide public comment this evening, if you'd come to the mic and please just state your name and address.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Fred T. Boom, can I sit in the?
Yes,
in this
please,
chair,
go ahead.
You want to keep the screen on, or can you turn the screen off? Do you want to turn it off?
Oh,
We're going to be using again, right?
yeah, we're going to be using this
Oh, you're
again.
using
If-
it?
Yeah,
Okay. I didn't know that. Okay, my name is Fred T. Boom. I live at 24 Cheyenne Drive. A couple of things I'd like to discuss while we're here. And thank you for inviting me and placing the public comment in the beginning of your agenda. First of all, the committee on June the 19th, last it met. And I noticed that there had been comments about a $15.5 million bond. I understand the need to pull money from this bond to pay for things like architectural studies, but I'd like to remind people here, and the two attorneys in this committee, that when the referendum was placed before the voters, and I got a copy of it, it mentioned particularly the restriction of not pulling any money from this bond other than for security and safety purposes, for any architectural work, any development work. And that's right in the ballot. I have a sample. You can't see it here, but right here in the sample ballot. So in referring to that committee meeting, and by the way, that it didn't pass by a very large majority. It passed by 1.5% of the voters, 10,000 voters, and passed by about 155 votes. So not exactly on a bond issue that typically in the town takes 2/3 vote. It didn't get 33% of the vote. It got 1.5%. So in the committee meeting of the 19th, Alderman McCarthy mentioned that he'd like to maybe take some small amount of this bond proceed to pay for some early architectural studies. And that's on page 2. And I won't read from it, but you can read page 2 on the bottom of the page, where it quotes Alderman McCarthy saying that. And I would only like to say that the temptation may be there, but I don't think it can legally be done. And I don't think it should be morally done, ethically done. You made a commitment to the voter that you could buy the building with the bond, you can secure the building, you can maintain the building, but that's it. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't take grant money. It doesn't mean you couldn't take what I call undesignated tax or fee revenues, and maybe instead of escrowing that money and putting a fund balance, maybe apply that to some early architectural studies. But the point is, you cannot do what Alderman McCarthy suggested, take some early proceeds from this bond for architectural studies. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. If anybody has a question on that, they can ask me. But maybe you should ask the own attorneys on this committee. You have 2 attorneys on this committee, Madam Chairman. Okay, the other thing that motivates me to come here is talk about the Performance Arts Center. I appeared before the what they call the Performance Arts Center Steering Committee, and I was not terribly impressed by their knowledge about construction. Construction never came up. Costs never came up. But I would like to talk about costs. And I did bring it up during my comments. And what I have, Madam Chair, I've got 2 handouts, and I like to hand this out to members of the committee and whoever else is here. I have enough copies. I got 10 copies here. I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's enough people here.
Thank you.
And then have a copy to place on the record
Okay.
in the minutes of the committee.
Mr. T-Boom, if I could just point out the meeting that you and I both attended, along with several other people who are here this evening, that was not actually a full Performing Arts Center Steering Committee meeting. That was the subcommittee that was looking at the operations of the Performing Arts Center. So that's why the construction items were not brought up there. The goal of that meeting was to look at moving forward to put out an RFP for a third-party operator. So that's why there weren't really discussions about construction at that
Okay, so
meeting.
there's going to be other subcommittees of that committee?
Yes.
Okay. Well, nevertheless, I think we need to take a look at the cost and the cost projections. Now, this chart is a larger version of the chart that I'm going to hand out in my next handout, but I made a larger version so you can read it. And if I knew that we could project, I could maybe bring my PC next time and project it on the screen. On the left, there are several columns. The second column talks about the city. Now, I tried again and again and again last year and earlier this year, over and over again, tried to get a handle on the city's estimate of how to come up with the $15.5 million for this bond. I never got an answer. I finally filed a right to know law request, and I did get an answer. I'll get to that in a minute. But that information, I don't think, was ever presented to this committee, was ever presented to the full board. Not that I can find in any research I've done. So what the city came up with, and I'll get to that specific accusation in a minute. The city came up with $11.5 million construction cost, $0.95 million for the staging, A&E fees, an F&E equipment allowance, land acquisition, which is the purchase of the Alex Shushaw building, and they came up with a bond requirement for $15.5 million. Those numbers in that totality is presented to the Board of Aldermen meeting in around April. It was presented to this committee, but no one really got into the details of how they come up with this construction cost. In fact, nobody asked. I look at the minutes. I wrote to Mr. Cummings, who's the economic director, and he kept saying, oh, there's been lots of discussions. I have the writing from him. Well, it turns out that that is a gross misrepresentation. It turns out that there was an architectural study commissioned as part of the web management company's overall contract for the study. And they had published a detailed study called, and I have a copy of it here. I don't have the entire copy of it here. I only pull out the parts that dealt with the Main Street. But they did an option for the Alex Shoe store. And I'm talking about construction costs, not the land acquisition. I'm not talking about A&E fees. I'm not stage lighting. I'm talking about just constructing the Performance Arts Center in the Alex Shoe store building. Their cost came to $16.4 million. You also look at Court Street. They had two Court Street options, $9 million and $13 million, and a Spring Street new building for $17 million. So the $16.4 million I plugged into column number 3. And if anybody wants to see it, this committee should be able to ask for a copy of the study. It came to me through a right to know law request. It's called City of Nashua Performance Arts Event Center Feasibility Study Cost Report, published January 11th, 2017 by a company named Fantasy Consulting Services. They won a contract to Duncan Webb to produce this architectural study. Also in this study was presented a memo on the staging and lighting and all of that stuff, which is not trivial. And that was done in a memo by a company called Fisher Docks Associates Theater Planning and Design, in a memorandum dated 4 January 2017. And that came out with high options, low options, but I put in the low option was 1.55 million. The high option came out to be about 2 million. That's for the staging, the lighting, the catwalks, ropes and all, the curtains, all that stuff. What bothers me about that, this information was available in early January 2017. This committee met several times in 2017. The Board of Aldermen met in 2017. There was a public hearing. 2017, this information was never presented that I could find. And I suggest this committee, which is the Public Economic Development Committee, which I think has oversight over the steering committee, whatever the steering committee does, as far as I understand it, because ultimately it's the Board of Aldermen's responsibility on the city-owned building. You should commission this, ask for the study from Mr. Cummings, because I think he's the one that provided to me in the right to know law request. If you add those numbers up, and I left the A&E fees the same, I adjusted it, I left the Alex Shoe store building the same, and you come up with a number called $21 million instead of $15.5 million. That means that there's a difference between the actual study from architects and people that know, and what Mr. Cummings presented in his memorandum. And in fact, Mr. Cummings did present a memorandum, and that memorandum is also available to you. It was dated July 2017, where you had a follow-up discussion after the Board of Aldermen meeting asking about these costs, and he presented costs, but again, he came up with $15.5 million for a bond, $15.55 million for a bond, in no greater detail than I presented in this table. That is a serious problem, because from what I can tell, this project, the way it's conceived, is $5.5 million underfunded. And I should also add that the city has a spotty record of keeping on budget. There are a number of projects I can name. You can look at the Burke Street White Elephant, $4 million plus million spent, sitting there doing nothing. There was a committee similar to the committee you have called the steering committee. They spent $105,000, $105,000 for a website for branding and nothing to show for it. The Bossy Parkway, where I personally sponsor the bond. Supposed to be option 2 was supposed to be 29.9. They spent well into 30 million, 34, 35, 36 million dollars. They went over. It's a good project, but I'm saying that the 5.5 million, that could be more than that based on the history of the city going over budget. This is of great concern. To me, it should be a great concern. Now, I'm not against building a performance arts center, but I think you have to look carefully what it is that you can do for the money you have. If you could have gone out for the 21 million, maybe you should have asked for it, maybe it wouldn't have passed the vote that I mentioned earlier. The fact is, you're stuck with the 15.5, you're stuck with the 4 million to have to get from from charitable foundation. You haven't even got a 501c3 yet. Now, I know a little bit about 501c3. I formed one myself. You have to have one if you get big hitters to pay you money because they look for tax deductions. And if it's not a 501c3, it's not deductible. So that is a number one message. Now, the other part of the message is, and again, the committee, and maybe you explained it, wasn't very interested in proposals. The city commissioned proposals for an A&E services and proposals for construction management. There are 23 proposals sitting in purchasing office right now. No one in the committee had looked at them. I don't know if anybody in this committee had looked at these. 23 proposals. I looked at them. I sat down 2 afternoons. They're not all that difficult to read. I didn't do to any detail of like you would do if you did a social selection, but I scanned over them. And I came to some findings, and I like to, this is the same memorandum I submitted to the board several weeks ago. I'd like to, again, pass a copy around, and I'd like to make this on the record of this committee. And I have 10 copies, so there should be enough to pass around again. I'd like to very briefly summarize, because I won't take a lot of your time, to go over these proposals, what kind of an overall finding is. The reason these things are important is you're getting information from people in the construction business. You're getting information from people in the architectural engineering business. You get some pretty hard, heavy hitters. If you look at who bid is Ekman, it's Harvey. These are companies that do well over $100 million a year in construction. Harvey probably well beyond that. There's another company I don't even recognize. They're almost like into $1 billion worth of construction. I personally have a construction background. I worked in Bechtel for 3 years. I worked on Yucca Mountain. This is the nuclear waste project in Las Vegas. And I worked, of course, in the Holocaust Memorial, where I designed a lot of stuff. I worked with a lot of artists building this stuff and construction people. So you get a lot of information from these proposals. You don't just let them sit on the shelf, especially when you start considering, what is it you're trying to build? Now, all these 23 bidders, there were 12 A&E service, architecture engineering service bidders, and 11 construction management bidders. All 23 bidders showed a great deal of interest, but most of them basically just presented a catalog of their experience, their examples of theatrical performance designs. So most of these designs are built into old mill buildings or old churches. I haven't found any that try to modify a retail store on a main street. Movie theaters are a favorite place to renovate. And these examples range from like $5-6 million in their examples all the way up to $100 million. Who can afford $100 million? But there's some very rich communities that can. Every bidder expressed excitement with this project, but not a single bidder of these 23 contracts, and all have examples, showed a 500-seat configurable theater seating on the second floor of a building with only retail space in the bottom. Whenever they build a theater concept, it stretches from the bottom floor or the basement to the bottom floor to the second floor to the third floor. But none of them are built exclusively on the second floor, which is projected with this proposal. That's of concern. Nearly every bidder expressed concern with structural issues. The buildings we're talking about, the Alex Shoe Store itself, the main Alex Shoe Store, is built in the 1960s. The four-story building behind it was built in the 1920s, old masonry. They point out that old masonry has not much structural support left. So a number of these bidders proposed putting a steel structure inside the building, like a structure within a structure. This makes it solid, which makes it safe, which also makes it expensive. I'm not sure, I don't think, looking at the details of the architectural studies, which is about 5 or 6 pages of details, I don't think he had any steel structure built within a structure. It's more a conventional look at renovating a building. So that would add to this if you did the steel structure inside the structure, it would well add to this $5.5 million deficiency. They express concern with acoustics because you got, performance data on top, you got people on the bottom, and they all express concern about meeting modern building code, which in our case is fire safety, especially if you're on the upper floor with 1,000 people. There's another trivial design. If you look at the table I just passed through earlier, it says the allocated floor space is an executive summary. At street level, you got 30,000 square foot facility, including lobby, ticketing, restrooms, code checks. You got 2,555 square foot restaurant function area. It's a capacity of 170. You got 6,000 square feet of retail space. The second floor would feature restrooms, private restroom, coat, lobby area, 7,000 square foot performance area, back of the house, wardrobe, furniture storage space. A flexible facility, performance space would accommodate 500 in tiered seating, 1,000 standing, and 550 in tables and chairs. And one of the bidders said, how on earth are you going to reconfigure the 500 seats from tiered seating into flat seating so you put tables and chairs in? Is it going to be manually? If it's done by machine, start adding to that $5.5 million underfunding. That came right out of these proposals. I'm not making this up. I'm not a theater guy. I know nothing about constructing theaters. Of all the bidders, only one, and I think it was probably Duncan Webb, who's one of the bidders. I'm not sure, I didn't take that note. Only one said, we'll start with the proposed configuration by Duncan Webb and proceed. All the others said, let's start from scratch. Let's call a committee of all interest and let's start doing conceptual design. This means none of them had faith in what you have in a so-called performance study. Now, we're not talking about people in the arts. We're talking about people that build things. Only one vendor of the 23 presented an actual round order magnitude estimate. I don't think the RFQ asked for an estimate to present it. Everybody did a walkthrough. I was there. I did a walkthrough. And guess what that bidder comes up with? For construction cost, $14.4 million. So that alone was $2.9 million above the city's estimate. And that's the only bidder that did an estimate. 3 of the bidders recommended getting away from construction management, design with architecture firm, hire a construction manager, and then hire a builder. 3 of them recommended forget that. It's too complicated, too costly. Take an integrated design-build approach. And some of you should know this. Some of the projects in the city are done by integrated design-build. I don't know if the Broad Street Parkway did, because when I was involved, there was a lot of discussion. You may want to research that. I didn't get a hold of Duke to find out. But they recommend a design-build approach. And one of them recommended a design-build approach, integrated design-build approach, with a guaranteed delivery price. That's not unusual in the construction business where you have risky construction. You get a guaranteed delivery price. Now, you pay extra in the fee, but you get a guaranteed delivery. You know what you're going to get, and if you go over, the contractor is held responsible. Now, you get big hitters like Harvey, Ekman, these kind of people that's not a problem. They got deep pockets, they'll never go under, and they know what they're doing. But you can ask for that as an option. You should ask for that as an option. So, what I have determined out of all of this, I spent a certain amount of time researching all this, looking at the minutes, looking at the discussions, looking at the presentations, looking at these cost studies, that you ought to seriously get away from this putting Performance Arts Center in the second floor. Put the thing on both floors, like a conventional design. You can maybe add some small restaurant areas. You know, you can go to Cinematic because you would have a small snack area to the side in the lobby. But don't put in a restaurant. We have enough restaurants in the city. We have enough retail space in the city. Why spend all this extra money building on the first floor? What you have here, obviously, is the influence of the big lobbyists for this thing, which is the downtown merchants. But they're not paying for this. In fact, I don't even know how many have paid any contribution towards this $4 million. The fact is, you're responsible to provide to the citizens of Nashua, unless you abandon the project. If you abandon the project, you get a $2 million elephant and money spent on just maintaining this elephant, which is started, I think, $36,000 and going up. So scope this thing back. Scope it down to where it can be 15.5 million. Get rid of this dual stage thing. And that's my first recommendation. And my second recommendation, start approaching this from an integrated design-build approach. Single contractor. You first do a conceptual design. That's not on the contract. That's just on the preliminary contract. Once you nail down a conceptual design, say that's a conceptual design, now you nail down an integrated design build contract, guaranteed price, if it's options there, and you're off and running. Those are my two recommendations based on my study. I thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? If not,
Thank you.
I don't expect to be before this committee again on this subject. At least not for a long
Thank
time.
you, Mr. Teboom. And I would just follow up for people who are watching. Next Tuesday, prior to the Board of Aldermen's meeting, there is going to be a special Board of Aldermen's meeting, and Director Cummings will be presenting an update on the Performing Arts Center. So just so people are aware of that. Is there anyone else who wishes to make public comment? I know two people had signed up and you spoke during the public hearing, but if you would like to speak again, or if there's anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, please come forward and just state your name and address once again.
Hi, my name is Michael Reinke, and I live at 35 Lock Street. I didn't really actually intend on speaking on the issue of the Performing Arts Center today. But I just want to, I actually did speak about it, I think it was 7 or 8 months ago, whenever the Board of Alderpeople voted to approve the bond issue. And at the time, and I just want to bring this back up because I think that sometimes things get lost. You know, we stop seeing the forest for the trees. And I think like how we spend our money on individual projects is very, very important. And I grew up in New England. I believe in being frugal. I believe in we shouldn't spend a dime more than we have to. But I think that the example I brought up at the time, in Waldo County, Maine, 40 years ago was the poorest county in the country. Okay, if you look at people living in Waldo County, Maine, what they did is they were very subsistence level farmers. And a lot has happened in that time. Maine, of course, has blossomed, just like we want Nashua to blossom. But one thing that in particular happened in Waldo County, and specifically in Belfast, is that in Belfast there was a bridge that was crossing the bay. And people who were looking at the nickels and dimes said, that bridge should be demolished. We're building a new bridge. We're building Route 1 over. It's going to be able to handle tractor trailers. It's going to be able to handle lots of different things. That old bridge that was just meant for like lower level traffic, perhaps even horse and buggy, I don't know. We should just get rid of it because that's going to be an eyesore. That's going to, how can we maintain that bridge when we already have this new bridge that we're building? But what's happened is that bridge has become a focal point for the community. It's bridged two different parts of Belfast. It's become a place where people meet, where they walk, where community events happen. And if you'd looked at well, how much does it cost to maintain that bridge at that time, you might have said, well, we should just demolish it, where today that has become a focal point, not just for people on that bridge, but now there's I think a 5-mile walk around the bridge. I mean, it becomes a place where people go to gather. And I think that that's important to come back to Nashua and the vote by the citizens of Nashua in favor of the Public Performing Arts Center, the vote by the Board of Alderpeople, to say that making an investment in our community and our community space is really, really important. Like, because if we don't gather together, we're not a community of people. And so I think that as much as it's important to think about individual expenditures, I really would urge this committee and the board in general to make sure that we're looking at how do we look forward to the growth 40 years from now, because you know what, if we think about Belfast as our example, where you could buy a house there 40 years ago for $50,000, $60,000, and today it's like $300,000, and for people who owned building houses then, that's a great investment in terms of where they're living. And I think that Nashua would like to be a place that sees equal, if not better, kinds of growth. And I think investing in our public spaces is really, really important. And I wouldn't want us to lose sight of that, even as we're talking about individual expenditures. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other public comment, could I have a motion to accept some communication that was received after the agenda was put together, Alderman Laws? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And so I'd just like to read these. They're both in reference to 018-019. One is from Rob Hammerstrom, who lives at 1 Pilgrim Circle, and his wife Diane, and it's regarding the proposal to regulate chickens in Nashua, and stating that he and his wife Diane are in favor of passing the proposal. And he states that they live near someone who has chickens, and that person has been responsive to concerns they've had. And so they are in favor of the proposal. The other communication is from Matt Dolan, who recently moved to Nashua and lives at 3 Pilgrim Circle, and is writing to also state that he and his wife fully support the proposed amendment. So I'd just like to enter those in. Thank you. And now we have our presentation. Julie, if you'd like to come up and join us. And I asked Julie to come to our meeting this evening to just give us an update on the information related to VO Ride. The city's been collecting all sorts of data about number of rides and where the bikes are used, and there we
I
go.
launched one too far. Sorry. That's all right. It's the mouse. Sarah's right. All right. So thank you very much for having me here this evening to share our ridership numbers and some data that we've gathered since our bike share program began. As you probably know, or I hope you were aware, we officially launched our bike share program on June 3rd. We had a great day, a great turnout for the launch, did a wonderful ride with the mayor. And since then, we have continued to have great rides. So since that June 3rd launch, which was about 15 weeks ago, we've actually had over 14,000 rides, 7,500 miles ridden on our VO Ride bikes. Over 5,800 users have signed up, and throw out there the over 400,000 calories burned for those who want that extra cookie tonight. And I think that's really great. And I just threw some photos up there that are actually from the Nashua Bicycle Sounding Board, where a lot of chatter about the VO Ride bikes has happened. And we really just have a real diverse group of people who are using these bikes. It's not just young kids, it's not just athletes, it's just everyone. And there have been 3 group rides organized. One started at City Hall, that's the picture under the stats there. We have great turnout at the farmer's market. What a great thing to take a bike down to the farmer's market, and the roads are closed, so you don't need your car. It's just fabulous, and it's really just been a really good experience. And to speak to the bringing a sense of community, I think these bikes really have. It really shows that the city is embracing bikes, and I swear I see more people on there, not just the VO Ride bikes. I see more bikes out there, and I don't know if that's just because I'm part of the bike culture now, but I think it's really been great, and we've been really happy with the stats. One of the things, and I apologize for the bad color, one of the things that we get through these bikes is data about where the bikes are being ridden. And this can really help us focus our investments on bike infrastructure. We want to make sure that we're putting lanes where people are actually going to be using them. And so that's a washed out map. I do apologize. Zooming in a little more, you can see people do ride up Amherst Street, up to Greeley Park. That's kind of the north end of Nashua. We're seeing high ridership at Market Basket, at the apartment complexes, really where we kind of expected people to be using, picking up the bikes, running their errands, and going back home. Moving on, and Central Nashua, not surprisingly, we do have very high ridership numbers. The red is the higher ridership, is a heat map. So as you go to green, it's a lower level of ridership. So the red where it blazes is really where we have a high density of bikes being ridden. Not surprisingly, up and down Main Street, stopping at the shops, grabbing lunch, also going through Mine Falls Park. I had a great experience riding from here at City Hall over to a staff meeting at Nashua Transit System through Mine Falls Park. It was a great way to get a little exercise in the morning and support the VO Ride program. And, it's good for me to get that exercise because I do tend to sit at my desk a lot making maps. And we also are seeing ridership, although at lower levels down in South Nashua, where it is more residential, less shopping, but we do have ridership down on DW South. We're seeing people going across and getting into Roby Park. Again, the apartment complexes are hot spots. And then also, excuse me, at the Nashua River Rail Trail gets quite a bit of usage. You can take these bikes outside of the city of Nashua, which is great because people are taking advantage of that wonderful trail system. You do have to bring it back into the city before the fare meter will stop, so that is important. But these bikes are getting ridden. They're also, I see on the heat maps, I don't have a shot here, but it looks like somebody works in Hudson, and because we see bikes going into Hudson, again, as long as they come back, we're fine with that. We want people to be able to get to their jobs. That's just a little bit on the data. And then, we've been really happy with the program, as I said, and we do want to continue this program beyond the end of the pilot, which ends October 2nd. We want to use data from the bikes and feedback from the community to determine if we need parking and no parking zones. Improper parking was a concern that we heard and we are sensitive to. Generally, I've maybe had 5 calls to my desk about bad parking, and generally we refer people to the company because they are the ones that actually deal with the infraction, and they said certainly, initially people were calling about bad parking, but it was actually okay. Bikes were in the right of way where we were wanting them to be parked. It's just people didn't understand that was okay. So we will look at that data and see if we need to designate parking and or no parking zones. We aren't interested in bringing fat tire bikes to the fleet for winter use. This is something that the company does offer. Actually, that's one of their bikes up there on the screen, because we are trying to provide a reliable transportation option. We don't want to take it away in the winter. If you've been relying on this to get to work, we want to make sure it's still there for you in the winter. That being said, we will take bikes, we won't have all 200 bikes out in the winter. We are very sensitive also to Public Works concerns about snow events and have a plan in place to work with them. They will contact VO Ride when they're expecting a significant snow event, and the bikes will come off the street and out of the way of the plows, both the road plows, which we hope there aren't any bikes in the way of the road plows, but more importantly, the sidewalk plows. They also offer electric pedal assist bikes that we may want to discuss as our project team into bringing into the city. They are great for people that just need that extra push getting up the hill, but they are a higher cost. So looking at equity, it is a more of a premium bike. But still, if it's a service that the community wants, we certainly want to offer it. Electric scooters have been in the news a lot. A lot of positive, a lot of negative. At this time, we're kind of sitting back and seeing how that levels out. So I would say at this time we are not considering electric scooters. VO Ride is looking into providing those for their communities that want it, but they will not be one of the vendors that just drops them without speaking with the, having an invitation from the community first. People either love them or hate them, it seems. We see a lot of pictures of scooters impounded, so because they aren't necessarily parked properly. So that's really where we are with our program. I did just want to give you one more little display here. We had a great write-up in the current edition of Fiddlehead magazine. The article was about bike share in general, but I would say that 90% of it was focused on the Nashua program. So I think it was a really positive article, and really, really happy that they chose to highlight our program. So thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Alderman Lopez.
I mean, I'm still waiting for a VO kayak, but
Yeah, I'm talking to them. We're going to start with the scooters maybe, and then we'll move to they'll get into other modes, water modes.
on a more serious note, I did also want to point out so working for the soup kitchen as my past job, for many years we ran a bike program because bicycles are a economic and cost-effective way to get to and from work. So as part of my job development program, we worked with a volunteer, John Burkett. He had this program called Let's Put People on Bikes. And it was really a labor of love for him because he appreciated bicycling. And we really wanted to make sure people were able to find some kind of economic ways out of the hardships they were experiencing. And so that program has transitioned into Gate City Bike Co-op. And I understand they work closely with VO Ride. So now we have a program where VO Ride is offering transportation options for people using the app and, more of a recreational. But the maintenance, upkeep, and funding for it is now also supporting a volunteer-based nonprofit effort that helps people who are homeless or in need of employment get to and from work. So I think this partnership is really, really turning into something we can be proud of.
Thank you.
Yes, Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if we are looking into getting bikes for children.
So they don't offer those at this time, and I can certainly bring up the topic and get back to you on that. That has not been something that I've heard, nor have I really heard about it in other communities with other bike vendors. They do kind of have that 13 years and older limit on their bikes, but certainly something to consider, and I will ask.
Thank you.
I'll also ask about the kayaks again.
Satisfied with that future where someone can ride their chicken to the Performing Arts Center.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? Julie, I have one question. We had VO Ride at the Back to School event, and I know a lot of people there were very happy to see them there. And one of the things that was mentioned is that they have an education rate. Could you speak to that?
My understanding is that it's for university and college students, not for high school students. But I can certainly follow up with them. That's my understanding, is that was for the more at the university level. But certainly that's something we can ask about.
Okay, and I guess to that point then, I guess Rivet and Nashua Community College students would be eligible for that rate. Do we partner with them? Or have we done any outreach to them?
I had given contact information to VO Ride to work on that outreach because it was somewhat of a business relationship if they were going to look to provide discounted rides for them, but I don't know if they have. I know that there was, because they came in June, there were some struggles
Right.
getting in contact with people, but now
Sure.
that school is back in session, certainly I will bring that up again. We actually, Ann, the general manager
Right.
for the local area, and I presented before the New Hampshire Public Works Association this afternoon, and she did, again, mention the passes for students, but that was at the college level.
Okay. All right. She and I had a very brief conversation, and just it was like, oh yes, we have a student rate.
Yeah.
And I guess I have seen what appear to be students riding out Broad Street towards North, and so just thinking about people having that as an option rather than walking to school, looking at what might be available with our high schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And the heat maps do show, red blazes at the school. So definitely seeing about getting some passes for high school students, I think is worth bringing up to VO Ride to see what we can
Okay.
do for that.
All right, thank you. And I have one other question, if no one else has questions, comments. You talked about using the data from the heat maps to look at possible bike routes. Can you talk about what's gone in already and where you're anticipating bike routes based on the information? I know several aldermen have asked me about bike routes that they've seen in the city, and I said, guess what? Julie's coming. I'll ask her.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. So working with Director Photo at Public Works, we are very much dedicated to getting bike lanes down, striped bike lanes where we can. My understanding in speaking with her is that they plan on incorporating bike lanes into their paving program. So when they are going out and paving a road that has a center line and it's feasible to stripe a bike lane, they will. In the immediate future, our hope was before the end of the season this year was to have bike lanes going from Riviera College up to Greeley Park. Some of those would be what are known as share rows, where we can't get that separate bike lane. We would use paint and striping and icons in the pavement to identify that this lane is okay for bikes to ride in and share with the vehicular traffic, motorized traffic. And then we'd also have signage and, regular signage as well. We were also looking at striping, making a connection between Mine Falls Park and the Nashua River Rail Trail. And that would involve West Hollis Street, which does have already really wide shoulders and should be able to accommodate it. So those are kind of my low-hanging fruit, I guess I would call it. Getting lanes in the downtown area was really important to me. As you saw from the heat maps, that's where we have people riding. Right. I do see people riding on sidewalks. That is not allowed. But I don't want to kick people off either if they're riding, as they're actively riding, especially. I like to see people riding, and nobody's been really obnoxious about it, I guess helps. And it's not just the VO Ride bikes, it's all bikes that I'm seeing out there. So, once we have accommodations, certainly we'll encourage people to stay off the sidewalks. But my goal is to make connections, from the downtown through the parks, connect our existing trail system to where we are actually seeing bikes being used. So people get from their apartment to, downtown.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, comments? Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to hearing about what's going to happen after October 2nd.
Yes, we are. Like I said, we're hoping to continue the pilot, continue the program with VO Ride. So they'll be seamless. We won't have any gaps in bike share service or operations.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie. Okay, unfinished business, we have none. New business resolutions, we have none. New business ordinances, ordinance 18019, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding urban chickens, and as noted, it was assigned to the city planning board, and they will have a public hearing on October 4th. Do I have a motion to recommend final passage?
I'll recommend.
Yeah. Alderman
So moved.
Schmidt? Okay. Alderman Schmidt moves to recommend final passage. And so discussion. Oh, all in favor, I'm sorry. Aye?
Should we discuss it first?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. I'm like, yes, because we're tabling it. Discussion, I'm writing and reading.
Can we have Director Marchand come up to answer
Yeah.
some questions? That would be great.
So everyone has their map, their copy of the ordinance.
We're gonna get the map on.
And I was going to
so-
say, Director Marchand, if you would
bring that
like to
back,
get
yep.
the map back up there.
Yep. And I'd be happy to.
Okay, and Alderman Laws, I saw your hand up.
Say, the gentleman from the Nashua Farmers raised some very valid points. I was wondering if we could consider those as amendments. I think he knows a lot more about raising chickens than I do, so I'll
Okay,
bow to his knowledge on it.
okay. Director Marchand, do you have any comments about those recommended changes?
Absolutely. I agree with you. I really appreciate the comments we heard tonight. We will certainly look to make those recommendations about adding the word adults, the run height, 93.3 about other domestic pets. I think there's more to that section of the ordinance that would clarify that, but I will look it up to make sure. As far as the areas that are currently zoned for chickens in R30 and R40, there is no changes there. There is no limitations on the number of chickens you can have. Everything as it exists right now is the same. This ordinance does not propose to make any changes if you have 12 chickens out there or if you let them run free, however that works. Another comment was about the free roaming. If you have a fenced-in yard, this ordinance doesn't prohibit you from letting the chickens roam in your own backyard. What it does declare very clearly is how much space they must have to be inside, how much coop space they must have, how much run space they must have, and the run must have a cover. But there's nothing that says if they're on your own property that you can't let them run free. So I just wanted to be clear on that. And I think in R30 and R40, I didn't double check. Don't have it here. I will double check. I think you can sell the eggs. We allow agriculture, small scale from your own house already. So again, none of that is changing. This is specific to the new sections, to the smaller residential areas, that there would be an allowance for chickens with these standards.
Okay. Alderman Laws.
Do you have to have your backyard fenced in to let the chickens roam free? Is that part of the ordinance as well?
As part of the ordinance, it's clear you cannot let your chickens roam onto other people's property.
Yeah.
Yes, so if you have chickens that just stay in your backyard magically, in theory, that would be fine.
Lazy chickens.
Yeah, there might be some lazy, or maybe you have a lot of things to keep them there.
Might it be wise of us to make that one of the stipulations, just to avoid any conflict in the future where somebody doesn't have a fenced-in backyard and their chickens are roaming into
We can
Alderman Tenza's yard?
certainly clarify that, we can certainly be more clear on the lack of free roaming
Thank you.
to the neighborhood, yes.
Other comments, questions? Alderman Tenza.
Thank you. So you said something earlier, the proposed ordinance said something about single and two-family homes, but you seemed to indicate earlier that it's really not two-family homes, it's duplexes, which these would be allowed in.
It's single family and duplexes, yep, single family up to two family, which we define, anything 3 family or more would not be allowed, even if it is allowed in RA and RB and RC.
So, so would a duplex be allowed 12 hens or just 6?
Just 6,
Okay,
excellent
so-
question, yep.
Three per family if they both wanted them.
Yeah, it's written per lot,
Okay.
yep.
And may I- could I
Yes,
just-
please.
About how many calls per week do you get for people asking for chickens?
It's the time of year, but certainly more than one in the spring and the summer. That we get less in the winter, but it is significant, the number of calls we get about chickens. Yep.
And so I'll just point this out, we heard from a number of people tonight. A number of the folks we heard from already live in zones where the chickens are allowed. So I assume a lot of those folks that you hear from, you can, or some of them at least, you can say, yes, you're allowed to have chickens, and they can have more chickens than just the 6, correct?
Correct. There isn't a regulation on them. We do hear from complaints, and if code goes out and there's people who have chickens in zones they aren't allowed, they are required to remove them now.
And if I just say, may have one
Please.
more. And so the idea is to shift this from code enforcement to the animal control officer to regulate this?
Oh, great question. No, the zoning part of it, the actual, the animal control officer would come into play if there's animal cruelty, if there's unsanitary conditions, so the health officer, and if there's a free roaming chicken. The code enforcement officers would be the first line of defense as far as meeting the zoning ordinance, because they have the planning staff as well, have the ability to enforce the zoning ordinance, and this is within the land use code. Yes.
So I have a lot of questions about this. Someone applies to your office for a permit to allow chickens. What kind of process do you go through and make sure that they have 40, the coop is set up 45 feet from their house, that their lot's big enough, that the setbacks are there, or is it just kind of a paper view and see what their lot looks like and see if it's possible?
Great question. So I just want to be clear, it doesn't have to be 45 feet from their house. That was an exempt section. It's looked at as accessory structure, so I think it has to have, it's 6 feet from the setbacks, so your side and rear property line, just like a shed would be. It's the same setbacks as a shed would be subject to. I think it has to be 10 feet from the house. So the process would be, it's a land use application permit. We would require you, if we have a plan on file, we allow people to make a copy of that and draw it in there. We would need some basic dimensions to make sure that it's going to meet the height standards. There's also, under the standards, 6E, we want to make sure that there's consistent materials. We don't want, 4 different types of siding. So some basic information about what the coop is going to be constructed out of and how it's going to be constructed. Basic drawings would be required. We don't require certified plot plans. So you'd turn in all that information showing that you can comply with the ordinance. It would be reviewed by the planning department. They would issue the land use permit, and then you can construct it. In general, if you were applying, say today, for a shed, there would be, a building inspector would go out and generally check, even though there's not a building permit because it's less than the 200 square feet that a building permit would require. They'd go out and eyeball it and check, make sure that it looks like you did what you said you were going to do on the plans. And so that would be the full extent of it. And then if a complaint came in, we would go back to the files on record.
And so there's no provisions in the law for any type of abutter notification?
No.
Or anything like that?
Additional questions, Alderman Tenza?
I had one, but I lost it.
We'll come back.
Alderman
Alderman
McCarthy
McCarthy?
Yeah, I had, it's actually not germane to this ordinance, but to the livestock provisions in the existing zoning ordinances. Somebody had written to us about restrictions in the R30 and R40 zones. When I was looking at it, if I read it correctly, we disallow raising chickens for sale, but we allow the commercial raising of swine and fur-bearing animals in the R30 and R40 zones.
I have not looked into that.
I was wondering if you'd noticed that, and we ought to do something about that, because the last time we allowed at least swine raising, it didn't end that well.
Very fair. More than happy to look into that. Chickens are for personal livestock is fine, but agreed for commercial raising. I'm more than happy to look into the commercial raising of animals in R30 and 40.
Other questions, comments? Alderman Kelly, or Alderwoman Kelly, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone. I just wanted to comment that Director Marchand has been so helpful in the culmination of this. There's been a lot of different partners to talk to for this legislation, dog catcher and the Humane Society, and looking at zoning. And so I've been really appreciative of that. And I also want to say thank you to all the people who came out from the community. I think they brought up some really good points. And we'll definitely look at those and see what we want to do with the ordinance from there. But thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Schmidt.
Where can chickens not be had? What areas of the city are it right out?
Right out now. In the highway business district, the general business district, the park industrial, and I don't have the zoning ordinance in front of me, the other industrial, airport industrial, and I feel like we have one other too. So any of the commercial zones, any of the commercial industrial zones would no longer allow chickens. The residential zones would allow for chickens.
I understand that there are some areas of the city that have covenants that do not allow chickens. Have you looked into that?
There are private covenants all over this city for everything from the colors you can paint your house to the types of things you can and cannot grow, to the height of your lawn. The city does not enforce private covenants ever, anywhere. That is a private matter between private individuals and homeowners, or the ownership of the covenants. So we don't get into dealing with those.
If someone came to you and said, "I'd like a permit," would you advise them to check to see if there's any issue?
That's a great question. Traditionally, no. We don't tend to look into covenants in any way. Sometimes they come up even as part of planning board process, and it is not part of it's not part of the city's role. We don't have the authority to enforce or to regulate those.
Certainly, thank you. R30 and R40, farms are allowed in those areas?
Yes.
So any rule that we make about chickens, it won't affect them at all, is that correct?
As this is written right now, would not affect them. We could write it to affect them, but that is not as proposed.
And the documentation that you're going to be handing out, does it talk about where chickens that can't be kept any longer, where they would go?
Oh, a great question. So they can go to the landfill. As far as disposal of chickens, those that have passed can go to the landfill. We've talked to DPW about it. They're aware. Same as manure disposal. If there are chickens, say you have a rooster, the Humane Society can help with that. And there are, I think, certainly other resources in the community for how to place chickens if they have to find another home.
There are some diseases that chickens get. Would that be a problem with disposal with DPW?
In my conversations with them, no, we didn't specifically go through the list of them. There's quite a few resources through the Cooperative Extension, and I'm sure the Farmers Exchange and some of the other local businesses are also a resource for that.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Questions? Alderman Tenza.
I thought of my question, thank you. So, your staff who would be enforcing these, this ordinance, what other types of, what are the types of things in the land use code are they also responsible for?
Everything
enforcing?
in the land use code and the house and code enforcement is responsible for the housing code first and foremost, and then they have jurisdiction over the zoning code 190. Planning is the first line of defense with those. So planning department staff would check it out first and try to make progress, and then code enforcement is the second line of defense.
And so things like landlord-tenant issues or code
Exactly.
compliance, they would.
Unless it's building code compliance things, then it's building staff. And if it was a complaint about sanitary conditions, we would ask the health officer, Heidi Peak, to come out, or the animal control officer, and they all work together quite a bit. So it depends on what the concern is. If it's that the coop is too close to the property line, that would certainly be planning, heading out. But if it's something else, we'd look at our team and call out whoever's appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Comments? I had a couple of concerns sent my way regarding chickens in our single-family residential areas, and people having dogs who are also in enclosed yards, and situations that might arise, or just even constant barking because they're looking at the chicken across the way. And does the dog become the problem because he's barking when the urban dog was there before the urban chicken? And there, and again, concerns about the impact on potential resale of homes, having chickens in the neighborhoods, and any cost or any smell that might be coming from them, or health related issues. So I'm just putting those out there. Something to think about. I think, a number of people who have dogs have said to me, oh, great, my dog barks at squirrels, and now if my neighbor gets chickens, I'll never be able to let him out. I can at least bring him in when there's a squirrel in the yard. So I'm sharing those thoughts with you. And just to make sure I understood correctly, anything that was more than 2 units per lot will not be allowed.
Would not be allowed under this to have chickens.
Okay.
Correct.
So in some of our more densely populated downtown areas where we may have 3 units or 4 units in a house, or townhome communities, they would not be allowed.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
The single family house next door would be.
Right. But if you're living next to someone who has a house with 3 or 4 units in it, someone in there could not decide to have chickens.
Not legally. Correct.
Not legally, right. Okay, thank you. Any other?
Madam Chair, if I may
Yes.
just, and I think your point goes to my question about a butter notification, because I think that potentially issues like that with dogs, or if there's a neighbor who is not, who may not maintain their property otherwise, who comes and applies, I think planning staff could probably nip some issues in the bud with some type of a butter notification and resolution, or some type of way for them to dispute that. I don't know if it's possible. Obviously, with other animals, there's not that same type of process, but this seems to be a little bit different.
I would just say the only abutter notifications are through Planning Board, Zoning Board, Conservation Commission. That would be sending this to a full board. There is no process to do a butter for notification and take comment on a permit.
Alderman Lopez.
I just like to point out, these same dogs are probably going to be barking whenever somebody gets a cat or a squirrel. And actually, where are the squirrels being buried? Because there's a lot of those, so we should probably be more worried about those.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions, thoughts? It's when it's public comment, absolutely. Okay. Alderman Laws.
Well, I was gonna just build on Alderman Lopez's, dog would probably also bark if your neighbor got a dog, and we're not preventing him from doing that, so.
Equal rights for chickens.
Alderwoman Kelly.
Just a quick note, it's also in the ordinance that you have to actually live on your lot. You can't just have an empty lot and put up a coop. It's an accessory dwelling piece of legislation.
Any other comments? So, it sounds like the 2 of the comments, at least that were made this evening, amending C2 and adding adult before the word chicken, as well as amending C7 to make the height 8 feet from the ground to the top of the structure. If I captured your thought, Alderman Laws, would you like to make that formal? And I'm just thinking, if we do that now, when it goes to planning board, they'll be able to see at least some of our thoughts and have a little more information.
So moved.
Okay, so you've heard the motion to amend C2, adding the word adult between 6 and the word chicken, and chickens rather, and amending C7 to make the height of the structure 8 feet from the ground to the top of the structure. All of those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so those will be captured as recommended amendments. So do I have a motion to
Madam
table?
Chair,
Yes,
I recommend final passage.
I think we want to table because we
Oh,
need to hear
You're absolutely right.
from planning board.
You're absolutely
That's
right.
okay.
Table.
So Alderman Schmidt has moved to table until we hear back from planning board. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so 019 is tabled until we hear from planning board. So public comment. And again, if you would just state your name and address.
My name is Jennifer Chan. I'm from 93 Folly Road. Since there was a lot of questions regarding the chicken and the disease, I thought I'll just share what I know. Of course, I'm not an expert, but this is what I know.
Excuse me, Jennifer, can you, there, great.
Can you
Because
hear
they're
it better?
recording it. Yeah, there.
The only disease that humans can get from chicken is from their respiratory disease. And their chicken respiratory disease happens because some people, especially in wintertime, decide that, oh, chickens are cold, let me coop them in. So they really insulate their chicken coop. The disease comes not from their chicken poop or anything like that. It's the ammonia built up from chicken poop, not the poop itself. There's no bacteria that would cause disease from chicken coop. It's the ammonia. So as long as they have good ventilation in the coop, chicken should be healthy. So that's what I wanted to make you kind of understand that is
Okay.
the respiratory. And also, state of New Hampshire Agriculture, Agriculture Department does testing for all the chickens for free. At least last year they did. And it's voluntary for any chicken diseases.
Good to know. Thank you. Thank you. Director Marchant, did you have information you wanted to pass out to us? Did you? Or were you?
I have some, if you would like it, I won't force it on you, but I have producing your own eggs from the UNH Cooperative Extension, and I have, it was more just informational and stuff that we'll keep at the front counter, poultry health and management of small flock.
Okay.
And so these are just some examples of what the Cooperative Extension has on hand, and these are some of the types of things that we would hand out with the land use permit, because we want to make sure we have some good resources and point people in direction to some good resources as they come in for these.
Could I ask you, if people here want hard copies or any of the other aldermen who aren't here, we can do that. But also, would you be able to send the links to those two pieces of information to Ms. Lovering?
Absolutely.
So she could include them in the minutes, and then anyone who would like to read them would be able to just go online to see them, and also the link to your presentation.
Our presentations are all on that
Okay.
hard top, the desktop, so that she can have them.
So she can have them.
Yep.
Great, right. So everyone can access this information then electronically. Thank you. Remarks by Alderman? Okay, seeing none. Possible non-public session, none. Do I have a motion? Alderman Tenza, motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. And we are adjourned at 8:41. Thank you, everyone.